Hi, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, we're so excited to have you. If you're a returning subscriber, I'm really excited you're back. If you want, you can go ahead and click the little subscribe button down below and also the little bell icon so you can be notified when I upload, if you're new, of course. And if you don't want to, that's fine too. We talk about a lot of true crime things over here and that kind of stuff. So if it's something you're interested in, I try to post at least once a week. I do still have a full-time job, so things can get kind of hectic on that aspect, but if you're interested, you can always go ahead and join our little community here. We'd love to have you. Like I said, we do talk about a lot of true crime things on this channel, so if that's something that your mental health cannot handle, just go ahead and click off the video and I'll catch you somewhere else. Your mental health is always more important than any YouTube video ever will be. And I also want to apologize. I'm a little congested and kind of sick this week. I'm not feeling super great. So just bear with me, we will get through the video. And another thing that I kind of want to touch on, I've been seeing a lot of things about true crime channels being kind of problematic or that kind of thing. And I want to make it super clear that I am genuinely trying to come out of a place of love and compassion when it comes to talking about these things. I understand that there are real families that are affected by these things, and that hurts. So if I ever step out of line or do something that you think isn't okay, I want to be called out. I want people to be like, hey, this is super uncool. You need to stop. Because I never want to be the reason that somebody is hurt. I have heard like a whole mix in between things. Like some people really like when their families, I've had several families reach out to me and want to cover their loved ones' cases, and that's always something that I'm willing to do. That's always something that I want to do because I want to help spread the word. I started this channel for two cases in particular. I started doing TikTok for two cases in particular that I did not see covered very much, or it always seemed like there wasn't very much care or thought put into the cases, and it made me, I don't want to say angry, but it made me frustrated because these are cases that are really affecting people and hurting people, and I will cover them. We're just waiting for the right time to do that. But if I ever do say anything wrong or do anything wrong or hurt somebody, I want you to tell me so that I can make that right. These always come out of a place of respect and love for anyone involved. I just genuinely believe that if we have conversations about these things, that we can prevent it from happening to somebody else, or we can prevent these things from happening anymore. We can know the warning signs. That way we can, yeah. So like I said, I do not want to hurt anybody with what I do here. I just want to spread awareness. So yeah, thanks for listening to my little spiel. So recently over on my TikTok page, I started covering milk carton kids. And if you don't know what that is, it was kids that went missing and were featured on milk cartons back in the 60s and went into the 90s. That's when things like Amber Alerts and those types of things started coming out, so they just became less popular. But one of those cases that I covered was Johnny Gosch, and this was requested that I do a more in-depth video about it over on YouTube, and I thought that I would because this is a case that is still making headlines. It is still talked about regularly, and it's just a very strange case. There's a lot of things about this case that are just really mind-boggling and kind of scary. I am not going to be able to cover every single detail about this case, but I'm going to try my best to cover the gist of it. I watched a documentary to prepare for this video, and I've linked it down below, and it's called What Happened to Johnny. Amazing documentary. I highly recommend you watch it if you're wanting more of the story of what happened to Johnny. And there's a lot of things that I'm going to have to kind of edit, and I can't say fully on a platform like this. So yeah, so if you hear me kind of beating around the bush on some things, that's why. TikTok and YouTube can be pretty not happy with me sometimes, especially the stuff I cover. And so I try to play nice. And so I will be editing myself quite a bit in this video. And I also, some of the research that I read is not for the faint of heart. So I went ahead and sectioned out my sources. I have that all linked down below all the time. So if I have them kind of like separated out onto like viewer discretion, and I have the documentary linked and all the other things. So if you're interested in reading more and a little bit more unedited versions of this stuff, then it's all linked down below. Go read that. So like I said, I'm not going to be able to cover everything, but I will try to get into the most of it. Johnny Gosch was born on November 12th of 1969. He was the son to Noreen and John Gosch. John was Noreen's second husband, and Noreen is a tough cookie, and she will come into the story quite a bit. She is a hero for Johnny. But they lived in Des Moines, Iowa, and they had the perfect little family life. Everything seemed really, really good. Johnny was working as a newspaper boy or a paper boy. He would go around and toss the newspapers onto people's driveways, their front steps, so they could read them every Sunday morning. He was doing this so he could save up for a dirt bike. He did that and he bought his dirt bike, and this was just his little job, and that's what he did, and he really, really enjoyed it. So we'll get into kind of the days before this happened. This is a little story that Noreen talked about that I think is pretty important to the story. The Friday before Johnny went missing, they went to a football game. His older brother was playing in this football game, and Johnny was sitting in the stands with his parents, and he asked if he could go and get some popcorn. So his parents gave him some money to go get popcorn, and he never came back. So that's when they went to go look for him. They found Johnny talking to a police officer, and so they had him like step away, and they said, "Hey, come at least stand by the fence so that we can see you." They went up back to the stands, continued watching the game, and all of a sudden they noticed that Johnny was missing from there. So once again, they went down to go look for him, and this time they found him under the bleachers talking to the same cop. Noreen felt like this was weird. Something strange was going on, and so they had him come sit back up with them. And when they left, Johnny said, "He was a really nice cop. Maybe I want to be a cop someday." The next day was Saturday, September 4th of 1982. Johnny's older sister had come back from college with her fiancé, and his brother was there, Johnny was there, the entire family was together, and Noreen called this her last supper. It was the last time that all of them were together. They were having a great time together, just enjoying each other's company. Johnny decided to go to bed early because he had to be up to pass the newspapers out, and this evening he asked his mom if he could go on the paper route by himself. Usually John or Noreen would go with him to pass out the newspapers, but he asked if he could do it by himself. Noreen said no, she wasn't comfortable with this because she just wasn't. And he was only 12 years old at the time, and she said that no one of them would go with him. He asked why. He said a lot of the other kids went by themselves, and she said, yes, they're either 16 or their older brothers are going with them, and I don't feel comfortable with you going by yourself. He seemed to accept this and went off to bed. After everyone else went to bed around 1 a.m., the Gosch residents got a phone call, and John Gosch answered the phone, and he said, talked for a little bit and then hung up the phone. And when Noreen asked who it was, he said it was the wrong number, and they went back to sleep. But this had been happening every Sunday morning for the past couple of weeks, which I find kind of strange as well. It was the next morning that John and Noreen were woken up by another phone call, but this time it was from an angry neighbor because he had not received his newspaper, and Johnny was responsible for giving him his newspaper. They thought this was kind of weird because Johnny should have came and woken one of them up to go with him, and apparently Johnny just went on his own that morning. So John decided to go out and look for him, thinking he was just running late. He told Noreen to make breakfast and that they would, go about their Sunday, and he would come back with Johnny. He would help him finish passing out the newspapers and then come back with Johnny. But when he came back, he was frantic because Johnny was not there. He had found Johnny's wagon just 2 blocks away from their house, and their dog was still tied to the wagon, but Johnny wasn't there. He told Noreen to call police, and John went back out and finished passing out the newspapers, and they called police. The police were only 10 blocks away from their home, and it still took them 45 minutes to get there. Noreen didn't waste any time, though. She started calling the other paper boys, seeing if they had seen Johnny or what they had seen that morning, and they told her a very strange story. There's multiple people who saw Johnny this morning. Johnny would usually cut through one of his neighbors' backyards to get to the area where the newspapers had been dropped off, and he needed to pick them up. He went through the backyard, and the neighbor had heard his wagon coming through the backyard, and when he got back out onto the street, one of the boys that was at the location where they had dropped off the newspapers, he was picking up his own newspapers, he saw a blue Ford Fairmont driving past Johnny. He sees this car driving past Johnny, but then back up and stop where Johnny is and start talking to him. Johnny then continues walking towards where the newspapers are. And yeah, multiple people say that they saw Johnny talking to somebody. But there was an adult man there that was getting the newspapers for his children, and he says that Johnny called over to him and said, "Hey, can you come help this man?" And as soon as he said that, this man made a U-turn and drove off quickly. Johnny said, according to the other newspaper boys that were there, they said that Johnny said he was feeling uncomfortable and wanted to leave, and so he went down the street, I assume to go pass out his newspapers. Multiple boys also said that when this man had driven off, he had flashed his lights 3 times, and after he had flashed his lights, there was another man that came out between 2 houses and started following Johnny down the road. So Johnny starts walking down this road, and that's when 2 other boys are coming back up towards where the newspapers are supposed to be picked up. They were running late, but Johnny was slumped over his wagon. This is kind of strange. They also said that they did say hello to Johnny and that Johnny had responded in kind, but that was it, and they continued on. But when they came back down the road, Johnny was nowhere to be found. It was around the same time that the neighbor that was living where Johnny's cart was found, his little wagon was found, had heard a car door slam, and when he sat up in bed and looked out the window, he saw what he thought was a silver and black Ford Fairmont driving off. He says this person drove off and made a left down, made it like kind of a rolling stop through the stop sign and then turned left and drove away. Now you have to remember that it was still pretty dark out during this time, and so the blue and the silver and black Fairmont could very well be, depending on shadows and those kinds of things, but everyone saw, at least they all saw a blue or a Ford Fairmont. When police finally did make it to John and Noreen's home, they said that Johnny was probably a runaway. In fact, they asked John and Noreen if Johnny had ever run away before, and he hadn't. Johnny was not the kind of kid that would run away or do that kind of thing, and they knew Johnny hadn't run away. So the fact that they would automatically assume that Johnny had just ran away is very strange to me. They also told them that they were going to have to wait 72 hours to file a missing persons report. We all know that the first 24 hours in any kind of abduction or missing person case is the most important. But there were searches done for Johnny, and John and Noreen were asked to not be a part of this. They were asked to stay at home and not talk to the media or anything like that. And yeah, they were just kind of kept out of the loop when it came to the investigation, but Noreen was not that kind of woman. She was going to be involved and she was going to help find her son. There would be almost no clues found in Johnny's case. There was almost nothing. And a part of me believes that had they started searching as soon as he was reported missing, that maybe they would have found a little bit more, but there was very little as far as clues when it came to Johnny's disappearance. But Noreen never stopped looking for Johnny. She put all of her effort into finding her son. She was dedicated to the cause. Noreen is a very stoic woman. She's not somebody who is... A lot of people talked pretty poorly of her, which I find very, very sad because she put so much effort into finding her son, and you can tell that she loves her child so much. She would do anything for him. And a lot of people almost, I don't want to say got annoyed, but got annoyed with her because she was so dedicated to finding him, and she was so... like she was going to find him and she was going to push until people helped her find him. I have a lot of respect for Noreen. I think that she is an amazing woman. I think that, I mean, I wish everybody could have a mother like Noreen because she was just so dedicated to Johnny and she kept pushing no matter what. And she's done amazing things that we'll get into in a little bit. But it was almost exactly 2 years later that another boy would go missing on August 12th of 1984. He was also a paper boy just like Johnny, and he also just vanished into thin air. His name was Eugene Martin, and once again, there was very, very little evidence to find Eugene. Johnny and Eugene were roughly the same age. They were in the same area in Des Moines, Iowa, and witnesses in Eugene's case also saw him talking to a man before he went missing. But many people said that this conversation looked like it was a conversation between a father and a son. Then in 1986, yet another boy went missing under the same circumstances as Johnny and Eugene. That case was Mark Allen. He was another paper boy, and he seemed to vanish into thin air. And while police have never made a link between the 3 cases, kind of strange, isn't it, that 3 boys go missing under similar circumstances and nothing is ever found. All three of these boys have never been found, and no one to this day knows what happened to Johnny, Eugene, or Mark. While there's very little evidence into what happened to Johnny Gosch, that's not the strangest thing about this case. The strangest thing is all of the sightings that have happened about Johnny Gosch, so we're going to get into some of those. In 1982, a woman in Tulsa, Oklahoma claimed that a young boy came up to her screaming, help me, I'm Johnny Gosch," but he was then dragged away by two older men. And all of this happened so fast that she was unable to get help for him at all. Then in 1985, a woman called John and Noreen saying that she had received change in a grocery store in Sioux City, Iowa, and on this dollar bill there was a note written, "I am alive," and it was signed by Johnny Gosch. They've never been able to confirm. Well, it's kind of confusing because some news articles said that it had been confirmed to be Johnny Gosch's signature, and others said that there wasn't any way to confirm that it was Johnny Gosch's signature, but Noreen is fully convinced that it's Johnny's signature. So this came up. John, asked her to send them the dollar bill. He would send her one in return, and all of them, John and Noreen are convinced that this was Johnny's signature and that he was still alive in 1985. Then in 1998, John and Noreen got a typed letter, and it was postmarked from Idaho. And in this letter, it was signed by "Your son Johnny." And whoever wrote this letter talked about that he was Johnny and that they had changed his appearance and changed his name, but that he was still alive and they had made him do terrible things. And it was a devastating letter, I'm sure, for Noreen to receive, but she did get hope once again that Johnny might have been alive. There was also a note found written in a bathroom in a restaurant in Denver, and it said, "I was here," and signed by Johnny Gosch. So there have been multiple sightings of Johnny, and a lot of people think that he really could still be alive. Noreen did have a theory based on the letter that she received that Johnny was kidnapped and put into a ring. And I have to edit myself here, but I'm sure you can kind of get what I'm grasping at. That he was put into a ring, and that for children, that they were doing harm to minor children. And all of this seems to be backed up by Noreen's next statement. In 1997, Noreen says that one early morning, she got a knock on her door, and when she asked who it is, the voice answered, "It's me, it's Johnny." And when she answered the door, it was someone, and he showed her a birthmark that Johnny had on his chest, and that's how she knew that it was Johnny. She says that Johnny comes into her house and that they talk for a couple of hours, and that Johnny does, let her know that her theories and her suspicions are correct, that he has been put into this ring and that he is being used for this type of thing. Noreen also says that there was a man that came with him, and that every time Johnny spoke, he kind of looked towards the man to get permission to speak. But Johnny also said that he would not be allowed to stay, that he would have to go, but he just wanted to see her and he would probably never see her again. And Noreen kept this a secret for a very long time, but it was finally under oath that she talked about Johnny having come to her house and talked to her. So there have been multiple sightings of Johnny, and Noreen is still absolutely convinced that he is alive. I don't know if she thinks that he is still alive to this day, but she does think that he grew up into adulthood and that he was forced into doing some pretty heinous things. Now, let's not pretend like these things don't exist, because it's very true and very much a part of life, and something that I think a lot of people cover up. And it's tragic and sad, but I don't think it's something that we can deny. I don't think that Noreen should be looked down upon because she believes that this is what happened to Johnny. A lot of the articles that I have tagged or that I have linked down below kind of show that Noreen isn't full of it. She's absolutely dead on when she talks about some of these rings and some of these things that are happening to young children all over the world, not just in America, but all over the world. And it's scary, and I think it's something that we absolutely need to talk about. But Johnny's case pretty much went cold, and there wasn't really anything else found. And I'm gonna take you back into 1989, and that's when a man named Paul Bonacci came forward, and he said that he helped abduct Johnny. He was currently incarcerated for hurting minor children, and he also testified saying that he had been a part of this ring and abducted when he was 6 years old, that he was very young when he was forced into doing these types of things, and that he grew up in it, and that he had helped abduct Johnny. I'll let you put all of the pieces together, and I'll let you read some of his testimony down below, but he was not given any type of leniency on his sentence or anything like that for giving this testimony. Nothing. He was given absolutely nothing for his testimony and for his confession into the Johnny Gosch case. But where people really speculate that he might be lying is the fact that he was diagnosed with DID. Now, for people who don't know, DID is dissociated identity disorder. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to go into how it works, but from what I understand is that your personality develops when you're 5 or 6 years old, when you're really young. And if something very traumatic happens during that period, you can have what is like a split personality. And Paul had this. His confession is chilling, to say the least. It's but very informative. And a lot of people believe that he shouldn't be believed because of this diagnosis. But for me, if anything, I think it makes it almost more believable because he did have DID and something very traumatic has to happen. From what I understand, I could be very wrong, and if I am, please correct me down in the comments. But from what I understand is that something very traumatic has to happen to you when your personality is developing, and that's how DID is, happens in somebody's brain. And it kind of lines up to his story. He was 6 years old when he was abducted and put into this ring, and so it would make sense that what he is saying, I feel like it would give him more credit, and I would almost believe him more because of it. He also knew of a couple of scars that Johnny had that were not made public during Johnny's disappearance. He also talked about the birthmark and those kinds of things. So there were some things that he came forward about that checked out, that weren't in the media, wasn't readily available for people in the media. And so, yeah, but people don't really believe his confession. They don't believe that he helped abduct Johnny into this ring like what he is in. And so, yeah, nothing really came of it, or so it seems. But I do think that what he talks about is kind of what happened to Johnny. But ever since then, the case has gone cold, and people still don't know what happened to Johnny. Theories are widespread. There's theories all about Johnny's case and what happened to Johnny and where he is. And I think it's super important to talk about because there are a lot of children who are abducted into these types of situations. And I think that it's very important to talk about. We can't forget that these kinds of things are happening because the less we talk about it, the more it could happen, the more unaware we are of the things that are happening around us, and the less we can protect these innocent children who don't deserve this kind of treatment. Noreen went on to help start the Center for Missing and Exploited Children. She also helped create a bill in Iowa that police now do not have to wait 72 hours to file a missing persons report. In fact, they do need to start looking into missing children immediately as soon as they go missing. I wish I could go deeper into Noreen. She is such a strong woman, and I highly encourage you to look more into the Johnny Gosch case. There's a lot of things that I cannot talk about here because it's just too dark. This story is very, very dark. But I highly recommend you look into the Johnny Gosch case and what happened. And it's just, it's a tragic story, but Noreen is someone that anybody could look up to. She is such a strong and beautiful woman, and she has done so much for so many children and for so many parents who have lost a child through abduction or those kinds of things. And so she's amazing. Just please go listen to her story. It is absolutely amazing. Like I said, there's a whole bunch of theories going around about what happened to Johnny, and one of them is kind of strange, but there was a theory that he was a reporter in the White House, that he was a reporter in the White House, that he was allowed into the press room. And what was strange about the whole thing is that this reporter that was allowed into the press room didn't have any journalistic experience. And he also had a pretty, I don't want to say strange background, but he did have a strange background of selling his body and those kinds of things. Like I said, I'm trying to dance around some of these words because I'll get flagged pretty quick, but that he was part of these rings and stuff like that. And so there's an entire theory out about that. I'm not sure if I believe it or not, but it is out there if you want to read it. And I also linked all of that down below. But there's all kinds of theories about what happened to Johnny. So I would love to know your thoughts. I would love, if you went out and researched a little bit more and were able to find out a little bit more, and then we'll have a conversation down in the comments. I personally believe Noreen's story fully. I think that's exactly what happened to Johnny, and I believe her. I believe her story fully. I think that Johnny really did come to see her. I think that Johnny wanted to just see his mom again and let her know what had happened. That way she could have a little bit of closure. Also, just please go watch the documentary, Where is Johnny? It is so informative and it's very interesting. Yeah, I highly recommend anyone read that story. And yeah, but I would love to know your thoughts on this case. What do you think happened to Johnny? Leave your comments down below, but that's really all I have for you today. So I hope you got something from the video. And yeah, there's an entire conspiracy theory I could do on this video, I think, on, the ties that this video has, whatever. And I've kind of thought about doing that, even though conspiracy theories can be this or that. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on this down below. Yeah, that's all I have for you today. So I'm sending you so much peace and love, and I hope you have a great rest of your night, day, morning, whatever it is. Bye.